All right, so I didn't get through Seed Article 1 for both lectures, so I'm just going to overview this. And also, it's just a good reference if you want a reminder of how to go through a journal article. So this is the perspective taking and fundamental attribution error article that you can read. So it's one of the three potential studies that you can use to inspire the study that you conduct in the class. So I'm going to overview the sections, and then I'm going to highlight where to find information and kind of talk through my process. And your TA is going to do that in lab as well with Seed Article 2. So here we have information about our authors and title and all of that information. And then you're going to have your abstract. Now, the abstract, it varies, but you're most often going to have an abstract. There are a few times where journal articles do not have them. The abstract is a short summary that overviews what you need to know to decide if you're going to keep reading. So you should be able to find out, is this relevant to what I am researching from the abstract? The introduction section is about introducing the topic. It has a literature review, so you see that there are a lot of citations to different articles here. And so the researcher is sharing what is already known about the phenomenon and theories and anything else that's relevant to their topic, and really setting up the information for you to understand the purpose of their study and why it was conducted that way. Next, when we go to the next page, the end of the introduction section will also have kind of a closing paragraph or a couple of paragraphs, but really it says this is what we know so far, summarizes it, and then how this is going to add to the literature. So how your study is going to add to it. And it's a very brief introduction to the method section. And then again, not all, but most will end with a hypothesis. The method section. This is organized in a way that's slightly different than what we're going to do in class, but you can see that participants information is here. It talks about the perspective taking training, which is the stimulus. So stimulus is just something that you're adding to your study. And this is an intervention to see if they can reduce the fundamental attribution error. It also talks about procedure. So the method section overall is like a guide to future researchers on how to replicate the study. And also it's a way for you to look at it and say, was this done well? Was this conducted well? Did they have good methodology? And then the next section is results. Results are typically pretty quick, and that's the statistics. So that's the telling you what they actually found, and it's without the interpretation. The next part, and you can see there's some figures in here. They'll be arranged in various ways for journals. We will talk about what it's going to look like for your study. But the next section is the discussion section. This is typically pretty long. So usually this and the introduction section are your longest sections. The discussion section explains the results without numbers and interprets what they mean, makes inferences about what it means, and they talk about how this applies to different populations. They talk about limitations, they talk about what they could do in the future. And you'll also see citations here because they are talking about how this ties in with previous research and if it supports the theory or doesn't support the theory, all of that. And this is a pretty short article, but there we go. The last part of it, you'll have an appendix, and this just includes, it can include your data, it can include information on your stimulus, or stimuli. It would, you're going to be having psychological constructs for your study, at least one, and so you'll include the scale that you used. And then in a 7th edition APA, this would go actually at the very end. The references, this is where you give credit to the people who you cited throughout the study. So any author, any paper that was cited in your article needs to be listed here in the references. All right. So this is what I do when I go through and I'm reading an article. I read the abstract, make sure that it fits what I'm looking for. And it typically has enough information that I can kind of get the gist, right? So this talks about what the fundamental attribution error is and talks about what the current study is doing. So just from this abstract, I can see that they're trying to reduce the fundamental attribution error using training. And just as a reminder, that fundamental attribution error we talked about in lecture, It's that we tend to, when we observe other people, we tend to attribute their behavior to things about them. So dispositional characteristics. So they're just a bad person, or they deserve this, or that's just their personality, or whatever it might be, instead of taking into account the situation. And there are different theories that can explain this. So the perspective taking training is what was used in this study. And they even talk about what they did. So participants watched a video clip of an actor reading an essay for or against capital punishment. And then they had to infer the attitude of the actor. So they had to guess the attitude of the actor. And then they give you the results. So it says that people who did this perspective taking training, they did have a reduction in the FAE. But the key is that, we need more information than that. We can't just take their word for it. We need to see how they did it and really understand how that fits with what's been done before, and understand what maybe needs to be fixed the next time somebody conducts this study. So my next spot, I might read like this introduction here, but I don't really need to if I looked at the abstract. I'm going to come back to this. And you might feel differently about that. That's totally fine. I typically go to the results section. Sometimes the method section, just kind of depending on what it's about. But the results give me a really good understanding of what I need to be looking for. So they typically are pretty clear about what the variables are. And so you can see there's control group for for and against conditions. And they're saying that these conditions committed greater FAE than the participants who received this PT training in the for and against conditions. So this, by looking at these numbers, and we'll practice this. So for right now, this might not be where you jump, but I would look at these numbers and I try and look and say, okay, how does this work? So this is the mean and the standard deviation. So, it's not like this one, this mean, here we go, sorry. This mean is 11.85. And this one for the for group is 10.05. So this doesn't have a lower, it's not a consistently lower number. Like this one is 5.22 and this is 3.5. So it's not a super straightforward numbering system, and I can tell that right away from the results. And again, you're probably not there yet with the results, but I think it's a good place to start to see what questions you have. So we need to figure out like what these numbers mean, right? So then my next place would be the method section. Definitely looking at participants. So in this study, we had 80 participants from the general public. Not super descriptive, right? We talked about that. 50 were females, 30 were males. They were all over 18. The mean age was about 25 years. There's a pretty big spread of ages. And they were assigned to different groups. So that's actually more of a design feature than part of describing the sample. This one is a little bit tricky. So one thing that you might notice, it says each group had 20 participants. Group 1, 14 females, and the mean was 24.65 years. What they're not telling you, and what you have to infer from this, is that, okay, if each group had 20 participants, that means that 6 were males. And the mean age for all of those people was the 24.65. So you have to pay attention to those little differences, but this is not spelled out the most straightforward. You can see here that they also give a little information on these different variables. So this is actually helpful for this study, since it has 3 variables. But you can see here that the study employed a 2-by-2 between subjects design. The key here is that it gives you the first variable, which is whether or not they received the training. So training is the variable. Perspective taking training versus no training are the 2 levels of the training variable. The second variable is the position, which is for versus against capital punishment. So again, we have the variable as position, for and against capital punishment is those are the levels of that position. And then the FAE score is the dependent variable. And when you hear score, you should be thinking, oh, that's a number, that's quantitative, whereas these other 2 are categorical. So we already have some good information here. This gives you a lot more information on what the perspective taking training does. So that's something that you would need to make sure you understand. And then this is the attitude attribution task. And so you can see here that they were randomly assigned, and we'll talk more about that, but they were randomly assigned to either watch a for or against capital punishment video clip. And the key is that they're told that the speakers were assigned to that attitude. And then they asked them to infer the attitude of the individual in the video towards capital punishment, knowing that they were assigned that position, to see, are they going to infer an extreme opinion. So here, this is where we get to the numbering. And this is a little tricky. So question 1 was please infer the attitude of the individual in the video towards capital punishment, where 1 was extremely against and 15 was extremely in favor. So 1 to 15, or 1 and 15 are your extreme scores, extreme attitude attributions. So we're looking at how extreme those numbers are. Whereas if it's towards the center, we're saying that we're not inferring that they have those extreme attitudes. So that's an operational definition of this variable. Then it goes more through the procedure and explains what they experienced. So then you can go back to your results and say, oh, this makes more sense. So in the for group, if the mean is 11.85 and 15 was extremely in favor, so that's the for, and they're saying that this person, they rated them an average of 12 points on that scale. And then in this one, those who received the training only rated as a 10, they're saying that this 10 is less extreme. That's a less extreme rating. So that's where this gets tricky, and you have to really go back between those sections and make sure you're understanding what they're doing there. So then you go and look at the discussion section. You might go back and forth, but that should really help you understand this article. So once you go through this article and spend some time with it, then you can click into the link and check out my responses and the information that I added to that spreadsheet. And so you can see what information I put down as being important. There's a space in that spreadsheet for you to add additional notes. And so definitely use that and feel free to reach out with any questions.